January 1945. Snow blankets the small Belgian village of Holzheim, muffling every sound, every breath, every mistake. The war is almost over, but for the men standing in this frozen clearing, the end feels very far away. Rifles are raised. Knees sink into the snow. 90 armed German soldiers form a tightening circle, and at the center of it all stands one American sergeant, separated from his men, with a German MP-40 pressed hard against his stomach. Before this story goes any further, leave a comment right now. Ask yourself what you would do if one single decision, lasting only seconds, stood between surrender and survival. Write what comes to your mind, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about fear and courage. This is a real story. No exaggeration, no legend added later. What happened here lasted less than a minute, but it changed the fate of an entire group of soldiers. And it earned one man the highest military honor in the United States. If you want more true stories like this, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and stay until the end, because what happens next unfolds faster than a heartbeat. The American soldiers kneeling in the snow belong to the 3rd Infantry Division. They are exhausted, half frozen, and surrounded. Their leader, Sergeant Leonard Funk, is only 20 years old, but already a veteran of some of the bloodiest fighting of the war. He has survived Normandy. He has fought through France. He has jumped into chaos during Operation Market Garden. And now, in the Battle of the Bulge, he faces what looks like the final mistake of his life. The German officer steps forward and begins shouting orders. His words are sharp, confident, final. But Leonard Funk does not understand German. The sounds mean nothing to him. And in that moment of confusion, with death inches from his body, something unexpected happens. He laughs. Not out of bravery, not out of arrogance, but because the absurdity of the moment overwhelms him. Surrounded by enemies, his men helpless, a weapon digging into his stomach, and words he cannot understand filling the cold air, his mind rejects panic. The German officer freezes. For just a fraction of a second, the situation cracks. That second is everything. Leonard Funk's hands are already moving. Slung across his body is a Thompson submachine gun. In one smooth motion, he brings it up and fires point blank. The German officer collapses before he can react. Funk does not hesitate. He pivots, firing again, bullets tearing through the tight formation of stunned German soldiers. Snow erupts. Shouts explode. The silence of Holzheim is shattered. In less than 45 seconds, Leonard Funk empties his magazine, reloads with a speed born of instinct, and continues firing. The Germans, believing they are under attack by a larger force, break. Weapons drop. Soldiers scatter. Some flee into the trees. Others surrender on the spot. When the smoke clears, 90 armed German soldiers are gone. Some wounded, some captured. The rest vanished into the white forest. Not a single American soldier is killed. Those 45 seconds rewrite the story completely. What began as surrender turns into victory. What should have been capture becomes legend. But this moment did not come from nowhere. Leonard Funk was not reckless. He was trained, tested, and forged by months of relentless combat. From the beaches of Normandy to the chaos of airborne landings in the Netherlands, every step of his journey sharpened his instincts for moments exactly like this one. And to understand why he reacted the way he did in Holzheim, you need to go back to where his war truly began, under fire, with no guarantees of survival, because Normandy changed him forever. And what happened there explains everything that followed. The sea was rough the morning Leonard Funk stepped onto the landing craft. Normandy did not look like a place where heroes were made. It looked like a place where young men disappeared. The air was thick with smoke, salt, and fear, and every soldier understood one truth without saying it out loud. Once the ramp dropped, nothing would ever be the same again. Funk moved with the 3rd Infantry Division through chaos that had no rhythm. Machine gun fire stitched the sand. Mortar rounds tore open the earth. Orders were shouted, lost, shouted again. Men fell not because they were careless, but because war allowed no margin for hesitation. Funk learned quickly that survival depended on acting before doubt could settle in. In Normandy, he learned how fast situations collapsed. One second you advanced with a squad, the next you were alone, surrounded by noise and confusion. It was there that he developed the habit that would later save dozens of lives. When the moment demanded action, he acted without waiting for certainty. France unfolded mile by mile, hedgerow by hedgerow. The enemy was disciplined, dug in, and invisible until it was too late. Funk led patrols through narrow lanes where every corner could hide a machine gun nest. Each engagement sharpened his awareness. He learned to read silence, to sense movement, to recognize the instant when hesitation would become fatal. By the time Allied forces pushed deeper into Europe, Funk was no longer just surviving combat. He was commanding under pressure. His men trusted him because he did not freeze when plans collapsed. When radios failed, when officers went down, Funk made decisions that kept units moving forward. Then came Operation Market Garden. Paratroopers dropped into the Netherlands with ambitious objectives and fragile supply lines. The plan depended on speed and coordination, but the reality was scattered landings, broken communications, and unexpected resistance. Funk found himself navigating unfamiliar towns under constant threat. German counterattacks came hard and fast, often without warning. In one engagement, his unit was pinned down by automatic fire from a concealed position. Waiting meant being destroyed piece by piece. Funk crawled forward alone, using debris and shadows for cover, until he was close enough to neutralize the position. When he returned, his uniform was torn, his face streaked with dirt, but the path forward was open. Market Garden taught him another lesson. Boldness created momentum. The enemy often expected caution. When faced with aggression, even well-armed forces hesitated. Funk saw it again and again. Surprise fractured confidence. Speed multiplied effect. Winter arrived early that year. The Battle of the Bulge was unlike anything Funk had experienced before. Cold became an enemy, as dangerous as any soldier. Weapons jammed. Fingers went numb. Snow erased familiar landmarks. German forces launched a massive offensive through the Ardennes, exploiting weather and surprise. Units were cut off. Roads disappeared beneath ice. Every movement risked ambush. It was during this brutal phase that Funk's unit moved near Holzheim. Visibility was poor. The forest swallowed sound. German patrols roamed aggressively, testing American lines for weakness. Funk was leading his men when they were suddenly surrounded. There was no dramatic build-up, no warning shot, just raised weapons and shouted commands. In seconds, the situation collapsed into surrender. Funk's men were ordered to kneel, rifles were taken. 90 German soldiers closed in, confident, organized, and armed. The German officer stepped forward, assuming control of prisoners who, by all logic, were already defeated. And yet, inside Funk's mind, something refused to accept that this was the end. All the lessons of Normandy, of France, of the Netherlands, of the frozen Ardennes compressed into a single awareness. He noticed spacing. He noticed the officer's position. He noticed the tension shift as the Germans focused on issuing orders rather than maintaining dominance. Then came the language barrier. The officer spoke forcefully, expecting obedience. Funk heard only noise, and he laughed. That laugh was not defiance. It was instinct rejecting paralysis. It fractured the moment. It unsettled the officer. And in that microscopic pause, Funk's training took over. What followed would unfold faster than conscious thought, driven by muscle memory, timing, and a willingness to accept the consequences without hesitation. The Germans believed they had control. They were wrong, and the exact sequence of actions Funk took in those next seconds would determine whether his men lived or died. That moment is where everything narrows to less than a minute. The laugh fades into silence, and silence becomes motion. Leonard Funk's hands move before fear can speak. The Thompson comes up from his chest, the barrel already aligned with the German officer standing closest. The distance is less than an arm's length. There is no warning, no command. Only the sharp, tearing sound of automatic fire ripping through the frozen air. The officer drops instantly. For a fraction of a second, the German soldiers freeze. Their confidence collapses into confusion. No one expects a prisoner to attack. No one expects it to happen from the center of the formation. Funk does not wait for them to recover. He pivots, firing again, the recoil slamming into his shoulder as the Thompson empties its magazine into the nearest cluster of soldiers. Snow explodes around falling bodies. Shouts overlap in panic. Orders are screamed, but they come too late and from too many directions. Funk steps forward, not back. He drops to one knee, ejects the empty magazine, and slams in a fresh one with practiced speed. His hands do not shake. His movements are clean, efficient, almost mechanical. Training takes over completely. He fires again, sweeping the weapon across the line of stunned Germans. From the enemy's perspective, this is no longer a single man. It feels like an ambush, like hidden Americans opening fire from all sides. Soldiers scramble for cover that does not exist. Rifles are dropped as men turn and run blindly into the trees. The entire exchange lasts less than 45 seconds. When the firing stops, the clearing is unrecognizable. Bodies lie scattered in the snow. Weapons are abandoned where hands released them in panic. The remaining German soldiers are gone, fleeing into the forest, convinced they have triggered something far larger than one sergeant with a submachine gun. Leonard Funk turns back to his men. They are still kneeling, frozen, staring at him, as if unsure whether what they just witnessed was real. He shouts for them to get up. His voice cuts through shock and disbelief. They move instantly, grabbing weapons, re-establishing formation, snapping back into soldiers instead of prisoners. Not one of them is wounded. Moments earlier, capture had been inevitable. Now the road ahead is open. There is no celebration, no pause to process what just happened. Funk knows better. The Germans could regroup, artillery could follow. He orders his men to move fast before the enemy understands what actually occurred. As they withdraw from the clearing, the reality of the moment begins to sink in. 90 armed enemy soldiers had surrounded them. One decision shattered that outcome completely. Word spreads quickly through the unit. Not exaggerated, not embellished, just repeated in stunned disbelief. A single sergeant, surrounded, turned surrender into survival through speed and audacity. Command officers debrief Funk later. They ask for details, distances, timing, numbers. Each time, the story sounds unreal even to trained professionals, but the evidence remains on the ground at Holzheim, the bodies, the abandoned weapons, the accounts of every man who witnessed it. In the days that follow, the Battle of the Bulge continues to rage. Cold Claims lives without firing a shot. Units are still pushed to their limits, but Funk's action becomes a point of quiet inspiration. Proof that even in the worst conditions, initiative still matters. Eventually, the paperwork begins. Reports move up the chain of command. What happened in that frozen clearing is reviewed again and again. Officers debate whether the account is accurate, whether the numbers make sense, whether a single man could truly do what is being described. Then they speak to the men who were there. There is no doubt in their voices. They describe the MP pressed into Funk's stomach. The confusion, the laugh, the first shot, the speed, the shock on the enemy's faces. They describe knowing, in that instant, that they were alive, only because their sergeant refused to accept the situation as final. By the time the war ends, Leonard Funk returns home quietly. He does not seek attention. He does not retell the story unless asked. But the army does not forget. The decision is made to award him the Medal of Honor, and when the citation is read, it captures not only what he did, but what it represented. Initiative under fire, courage without hesitation, leadership measured in seconds. But the true weight of that medal lies not in ceremony, but in what it meant to the men whose lives continued because of those 45 seconds. And to understand why Funk himself never spoke of it as heroism, you have to hear what he said later, when asked why he acted at all. Because his answer reveals something deeper than bravery. Years later, when Leonard Funk was asked why he acted the way he did, his answer was simple. He said he did not think. He said there was no time for thought, only for movement. To him, the moment in Holzheim was not a heroic decision. It was a refusal to freeze. That perspective matters. War creates moments where logic collapses. Training exists for those moments, when fear is faster than reason. Funk's life before the war had not pointed toward medals or recognition. He was an ordinary young man who entered an extraordinary situation, one that demanded an immediate response or total submission. After the Battle of the Bulge, the war moved rapidly toward its end. Germany's resistance crumbled under pressure from both east and west. Funk continued serving, but nothing ever matched the intensity of those seconds in the snow. For him, the war was a sequence of responsibilities, not stories. The Medal of Honor ceremony came later. The citation described his actions with formal language, precise wording, and official weight. It spoke of courage above and beyond the call of duty. It detailed how he killed or captured enemy soldiers and saved his men from certain capture. Funk listened quietly. He did not correct anyone, but he did not celebrate either. He knew how close the situation had been to disaster. He understood how easily one mistimed movement or a jammed weapon could have reversed everything. Survival, to him, felt fragile, not triumphant. What his men remembered, however, was clarity. They remembered the instant when surrender had felt final, when the cold pressed through their uniforms and the future collapsed into captivity. And then they remembered Funk moving forward instead of inward, acting instead of waiting. Many of those men carried that lesson for the rest of their lives, not about violence but about decisiveness, about the cost of hesitation when a moment demands action. Historians later pointed out that Funk's action contradicted conventional wisdom. He was outnumbered, surrounded. His men were already disarmed. Textbook logic would have labeled resistance as suicidal, but battlefields are not textbooks. They are unstable systems where psychology matters as much as firepower. The German soldiers in Holzheim believed the fight was over. Their posture reflected it. Funk sensed that shift. He exploited the smallest possible opening, knowing there would never be a second chance. That understanding separates survival from submission. As the decades passed, the story of Holzheim remained relatively unknown outside military circles. It lacked the scale of famous battles. It did not involve famous generals or massive troop movements. It involved seconds, a clearing, snow, a single choice. Yet within that simplicity lies its power. Funk never claimed his action was repeatable. He never suggested others should do the same. He acknowledged that timing, training, and circumstance aligned in a rare way. What mattered was not imitation, but awareness. The ability to recognize when a situation is not as fixed as it appears. When Leonard Funk passed away, his Medal of Honor remained a symbol, but not the full story. The real legacy lived in the men who walked away from Holzheim alive, men who returned home, men who built families, men whose lives continued because one person acted without waiting for permission. The war ended. Europe rebuilt. History moved on. But moments like that do not disappear. They linger quietly, reminding us that history often turns not on grand plans, but on sudden, irreversible decisions made under pressure. And in the final part of this story, what matters most is not what Funk did, but what his story asks of anyone who hears it. Because those 45 seconds are not only about war, they're about choice. Choice is easy when time allows reflection. It becomes something else entirely when time collapses. Leonard Funk never described his action in Holzheim as bravery, because bravery implies awareness of danger. In those seconds, he did not weigh outcomes. He responded to a moment that demanded movement or surrender. That distinction is the core of this story. History often celebrates outcomes while overlooking the conditions that produce them. Funk did not know his action would succeed. He did not know his weapon would not jam. He did not know the Germans would break instead of firing back. He only knew that remaining still guaranteed captivity and possibly death later. In that instant, uncertainty became preferable to certainty. The 45 seconds in Holzheim did not change the course of the war. They did not alter borders or strategies, but they changed the lives of every man present. That is how history truly moves forward, not always through massive decisions, but through personal moments that ripple outward in quiet ways. The Medal of Honor citation captures the facts, but not the silence that followed, not the sound of snow settling again after gunfire stopped, not the look exchange between soldiers realizing they were still alive. Those details exist only in memory. Funk returned home and lived a full life. He rarely spoke of the war unless asked. When he did, he focused not on himself, but on his men. He believed leadership meant responsibility, not recognition. The medal to him belonged as much to those who trusted him as to the action itself. What makes his story endure is not violence, but clarity under pressure, the understanding that moments arrive without warning, offering no time for preparation or second chances. In those moments, the absence of action is itself a decision. Funk's laugh, misunderstood by his captors, was the final rejection of paralysis. It disrupted expectation. It broke the script. And in doing so, it created a path where none seemed possible. This is not a story about seeking danger. It is a story about recognizing when a situation is not as finished as it appears, about seeing possibility where others see conclusion, about understanding that fear does not disappear, but it does not have to command the outcome. The men who survived Holzheim carried that truth forward into civilian life. Some faced hardship, some faced loss. Some faced moments where decisions had to be made without certainty, and when those moments came, they remembered a clearing in Belgium, snow under their knees, and a sergeant who moved when no one else could. That is the legacy of Leonard Funk. Not a legend inflated over time, not a myth. A real man in a real moment choosing action in the face of inevitability. If this story made you think differently about courage, leave a comment with what stood out to you most. Your perspective matters, and stories like this are kept alive through shared reflection. If you want more real stories that reveal what history feels like in its most human moments, make sure you are subscribed and have left a like. It helps this channel continue bringing these stories forward, because history is not only written by those who plan, it is written by those who act when seconds decide everything. And sometimes all it takes to change everything is one decision made in less than a minute.